What's up, y'all? The NFL regular season is in the rear view, but the playoffs are on the horizon. We know you're going to be playing DFS. You've probably already drafted 20 teams over on Underdog if you're like us, so we couldn't leave you hanging. We've got a special treat for you. We are going to use the brand new Fantasy Life Power Rankings. We're going to go team by team to give you a utilization takeaway for every squad to help you dominate the postseason contests. So we're going to start with the Seahawks and Kenneth Walker. He has handled 90% or more of the rushing attempts in 3 of the last 4 games. That has led to 26, 23, and 29 rushing attempts. And oh yeah, we've got Travis Homer out now on IR. That's led to 53% of the 2-minute offense over the last 4 games. So you have Walker operating more like an every down back. It is a tough out in the first round of the playoffs. They've got to play the 49ers. 538 only gives them a 19% chance of advancing to the divisional round. So it kind of makes Walker more of a DFS play, but if you want to use him in best ball, he's probably not going to be rostered as much because they are not expected to move forward. And at a minimum, you'll get that one game from a back with 25 touch potential. Next, let's talk about the Chargers, and that means we've got to discuss Keenan Allen. Since he's come back from injury in Week 11, he has a 26% target share, 9.9 targets per game. That means he's a key part of this offense. We've got a pass-heavy attack. We know they have a 40% chance of advancing to the divisional round, and if that happens, it could mean that Keenan Allen is a must-own player to advance. So now let's turn our attention to the Giants, and we will stay on slot receivers, and let's talk about Richie James. In the games where he's had at least an 80% route participation, he averages 16 fantasy points per game. And guess what? 5 out of the last 6 contests, he's hit that 80% threshold that we want to see. So while a lot of people may look at Saquon Barkley when they think about the Giants, Richie James is a name to remember. If we do see the Giants push forward, he's a below-the-radar player that gives you upside and differentiates your roster. So let's talk about the Jaguars and Travis Etienne, who could have a role that is diminishing. Yeah, we saw in Week 17 the snaps were down, but it was a blowout win against the Texans. Who cares? The problem is that trend continued. In Week 18, he only had a 56% snap share with 48% going to JaMychal Hasty in a must-win game against the Titans. That's enough to give me a little pause for a player that's typically the first Jaguar off the board when we know we can pivot to Trevor Lawrence, Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, all of those players later. And let's be honest, if the Jaguars are to make a push in the playoffs, it's probably going to be through their passing game, which means I am fading Travis Etienne. So now let's turn our attention to the Dolphins. You guys know about Tyreek Hill. You know about Jalen Waddle. I don't need to tell you anything there. But if you happen to want to use a running back from the Dolphins, Jeff Wilson Jr. is the clear pick. We saw Raheem Mostert suffer a thumb injury this weekend. And really, Wilson had taken over the backfield before that, averaging 60% of the snaps, 62% of the rushing attempts, and 60% route participation over the last 3 games. He is a guy that you can get very late in your draft, sometimes goes undrafted. Now, this next one, admittedly, it's not very likely to hit. But let's take a look at the Ravens, and you guessed it, Isaiah Likely. He is still in a backup role. We did see him play full-time last week with Mark Andrews out. And so there's a bit of projection here. You need the Ravens to give him more route participation. It is on the rise. He had 44% and 59% in the 2 games before he got to play without Andrews. But the beauty of Likely is his targets per route run. He's showing that he is a great talent. 25%, 36%, and 29% over the last 3 games. We just need the coaching staff to find a way to get him on the field. So if you're looking for a super contrarian stack with Lamar Jackson, you can get Isaiah Likely at the very end of your draft. So let's keep things on tight end as we move to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we're going to talk about Cade Otton. And I know you're probably thinking, what the hell, Dwayne? Why are we talking about Cade Otton? It's just an opportunity if you want to get different with a Brady stack. I know we're on Underdog. You've got an option of not going with a tight end. Maybe he doesn't make as much sense there. But on DraftKings, you've got to draft a tight end. And if you look at Otton over the last 2 games, 84% and 85% route participation. He has become the full-time starter at tight end, and no one even knows it. So if you want to get different with a Brady stack and you're feeling good about Brady heating up, try Cade Otton. So let's stay contrarian and let's go to the opposite side of the game with the Bucks this weekend, and that brings us to the Dallas Cowboys and T.Y. Hilton. Hilton has seen his route participation climb to a 40% over the last 3 games, and when he's on the field, he is earning targets, 36% targets per route run and 25% over the last 2 weeks. So this is a player on an offense that could play 4 games if they get to the Super Bowl. That's always a plus. Not going to be very heavily rostered, and he could be the number 3 wide receiver on the team by the time we reach the end of the playoffs, making him someone to consider with the last pick of your draft. So we'll stay on wide receiver as we turn to look to the Vikings. But unlike T.Y. Hilton, we have a player that is on the field for over 80% of the routes all the time, and that is KJ Osborne. Osborne has 3 top 13 finishes in his last 4 games. He only had 1 top 24 outing before that, so he definitely has boom bust to his range of outcomes. However, you can get him at the very end of drafts. He often goes undrafted. He's easy to stack with Kirk Cousins, who goes after a lot of the top quarterbacks. And we've got a 67% chance, according to 538, of the Vikings advancing to the divisional round. And on top of that, a 24% chance of getting to the conference championships. If we see the Vikings get hot and make it that far, there's a good chance you get utility out of KJ Osborne. So we've talked about quite a few wide receivers in a row. Let's go back to running back. As we look at the Bengals, we've got to talk about Joe Mixon. Obviously plays on a great team, good chance of advancing, not saying to avoid Joe Mixon. But one thing to remember is his role has not been the same since he's come back from concussion. Before the injury, 72% of the rushing attempts. That number is down to 57% since his return, and we've also seen Samaje Perine regain almost all of the 2-minute offense, something that had been a pleasant surprise for Joe Mixon early in the season. So just something to remember as you're breaking ties, thinking about how you're building your roster. Joe Mixon, not quite in the same role he once was. So let's take a look at the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, we want to be in on them because they've got an 81% chance of making it to the conference championships, 43% chance of making it to the Super Bowl, according to 538, loading up everywhere we can. However, there is one question around their backfield. This last weekend, we saw the 3-way committee emerge again, with Ronald Jones seeing season highs in snaps at 29% and rushing attempts 38%. We also have Clyde Edwards-Helaire potentially coming back into the mix. And what happened with Jones being out there? Only an 8% rush share for Jerick McKinnon. That's the lowest he's seen since week 12. Obviously, it cut into Isaiah Pacheco as well. Again, we love the Chiefs. We're going to be drafting them, but it's just something to consider. We could see this 3-way backfield emerge again in the playoffs. Now let's take a look at the Philadelphia Eagles, and we have got to look at the wide receiver room, where I'm here to say this is not a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2 room anymore. This is 1A and 1B between A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Over the course of the season, we have seen Devonta Smith out-target A.J. Brown in 8 of 17 games. He has a 27% target share. That is only 1 percentage point below A.J. Brown. So these two guys are really neck and neck, yet you always see A.J. Brown go in the second round. You sometimes see Devonta slide to the third. If you're taking Jalen Hurts in the first round and someone snipes A.J. Brown from you, don't worry about it. Go ahead and take Devonta Smith. Yes, it's a little bit of a reach, but you're putting your bet on the Eagles with Hurts anyway, and you shouldn't feel bad about it. Take what you can get. Let's dig into the 49ers, where we will stay on running back, and Elijah Mitchell returned to action in Week 18. 5 carries, 55 yards, and 2 touchdowns. No, we don't expect that sort of efficiency to keep on, but we know he has the big playability, which gives him the chance to break off the long touchdown runs. He plays on a run-first offense with the 49ers. He has spike week upside as your last pick, and if something happens to CMC, he becomes a cheat code for these best ball tournaments. Now let's look at the Buffalo Bills, a team that we know has a chance to play 4 games because they have an 89% chance of advancing to the divisional round, 61% conference championship, and 35% to the Super Bowl. The Chiefs can't have that. The Eagles can't have that because they have a bye week in that first week, which gives you an advantage when you're thinking about your Bills players. Specifically, let's look at the running back position, where we saw something happen for the first time this last weekend, and that was James Cook leading the team in snaps at 56% and rushing attempts, 41% in the same game, again for the first time this season. Yeah, it's probably still going to be a committee. Devin Singletary had a slight lead on passing downs, but seeing this positive data point gives us hope that potentially James Cook at least becomes the lead of the committee. And if something happens with Singletary, something happens with Hines, you get this down to a two-way backfield on an explosive offense.